"The rancher sought a cook," the Apache woman said. "I came to be your wife." Everything changed. The sun was setting behind the distant hills, casting an orange glow over the vast land. Ethan Bradford, a rugged rancher in his late 30s, stood by the wooden fence, his eyes scanning the horizon. His life, once filled with hope and companionship, now felt like a never-ending routine of labor. Ever since his wife Sarah passed away in a tragic accident 2 years ago, the ranch had felt emptier than the wide-open plains around him. The ranch, located just outside a small town, had been his dream. Ethan had built it from the ground up with Sarah by his side. Together they had imagined raising a family here, watching their children grow as they worked the land. But those dreams were shattered in a moment, leaving Ethan alone to tend to the sprawling fields, the cattle, and the countless chores that came with running such a large ranch. At first, he had tried to do it all. There were days when he would work from dawn until dusk, his muscles aching and his hands rough from the constant toil. He knew how to fix fences, tend to the cattle, and grow the crops, but there was one thing that always seemed to slip through the cracks: the kitchen. It was a small detail compared to the vast land he was responsible for, but it became one of the biggest struggles of his daily life. Every meal was a challenge. The simple act of preparing food had never seemed so difficult. Ethan's heart wasn't in cooking. He had always been used to Sarah preparing meals, the scent of freshly baked bread filling the house, the warmth of a home-cooked meal welcoming him after a long day. But now, the house felt cold, and the food he made lacked the love and care that Sarah had always put into every dish. He had tried his best to get by, scrambling eggs, making simple stews, and baking the occasional loaf of bread, but nothing ever turned out right. The meals were bland, and the kitchen often felt like a foreign place to him. He realized it was more than just hunger that needed to be filled. It was the deep sense of emptiness in his heart. The absence of Sarah had left a void not just in the ranch, but in his soul. Still, he pushed forward. He had to keep the ranch running, had to survive. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, he began to feel the weight of it all. One afternoon, as Ethan sat on the porch of his cabin, chewing on a piece of dry bread and looking out at the land that seemed to stretch forever, he thought about what it would take to make things better. He had heard rumors around town about a woman, a cook from a nearby village, who had worked in many of the town's kitchens. She was known for her skills, not just in cooking but also in bringing a sense of warmth and community to wherever she went. At first, the thought of hiring someone from outside seemed strange to him. He had always believed in doing things himself. But as he sat there, the realization dawned on him. He couldn't keep going this way. He needed help. The decision wasn't easy. Ethan wasn't used to asking for help, especially from someone he didn't know. But the idea of having a proper meal, of returning to a life that wasn't so grim, was more than he could resist. And so, he made up his mind. He would go to the town and find this woman. He needed her help, not just to cook, but to bring something back into his life that had been missing for far too long. The next morning, Ethan saddled his horse and rode into town. The journey was short, but as he rode along the dirt path, his mind was full of questions. Who was this woman? What kind of person would she be? Would she be willing to work on the ranch? He had no idea, but he knew he had to try. The town was small but bustling with life. It was a tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone, and word traveled fast. Ethan's arrival didn't go unnoticed. As he tied his horse to the post outside the local store, a few familiar faces greeted him with nods, but he didn't have time for pleasantries. He was on a mission. He made his way to the cafe, where he had heard the woman worked. Inside, the warm aroma of fresh brewed coffee and baked goods filled the air. The cafe was a small, cozy place, filled with townsfolk enjoying their meals and chatting about the day's news. Behind the counter, a woman was busy preparing food. She moved gracefully, her hands working quickly as she chopped vegetables, stirred pots, and plated dishes with precision. Her long, dark hair was tied back in a simple braid, and she wore a faded apron over her clothes, the kind that showed years of use. As Ethan stood by the door, he couldn't help but notice the calm confidence she exuded. There was something about her that stood out, even in a room full of people. She wasn't loud or demanding, but there was a quiet strength in the way she carried herself. It was as if she had been doing this for years, and nothing could shake her. One of the townsfolk noticed Ethan standing by the door and greeted him with a wave. "Looking for someone, Ethan?" he asked with a grin. Ethan hesitated before answering. "I'm looking for the cook," he said, his voice low. "The one they say is the best in town." The man raised an eyebrow, glancing over at the woman behind the counter. "Ah, Ayana. She's the one you're looking for. She's been around here for a while now. Always willing to help, always with a smile. Why do you ask?" "I need her help," Ethan replied simply. He didn't feel the need to explain further. The rancher was a man of few words, and his decision had already been made. The man chuckled. "Well, you'll have to ask her yourself. But I'll tell you this, she's a good one. Strong, capable. You won't regret it." Ethan walked over to the counter where Ayana was busy plating a dish. She looked up at him with a soft smile, her brown eyes reflecting a quiet strength. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice calm and pleasant. "I was wondering if you would come work on my ranch," Ethan said, his voice steady but unsure. "I'm looking for a cook. Things have been hard since my wife passed. I'm having trouble keeping up with everything." He paused, unsure of how much to share.
"I've heard you're the best at what you do." Ayana's eyes seemed to soften, and she gave him a slow nod.
"I've heard of you, Mr. Bradford," she said. "Your ranch is well known. But I must admit, I am not just looking for work as a cook. I've come for something more." Ethan raised an eyebrow, surprised by her boldness. "What do you mean I've come to be your wife?" she said simply, her gaze steady and unwavering. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had not expected this, not in the least. He stared at her, unsure of how to respond. Was this a misunderstanding? Or had she been sent here for a reason beyond just cooking? The moment hung in the air, thick with uncertainty, but something about the way she spoke made him pause. There was no hesitation in her voice, no sense of doubt. It was as if she had known this moment would come. For a moment, all Ethan could do was look at her, wondering what had just happened. This simple request, this declaration, was more than he could have ever imagined. His life was about to take a turn he hadn't expected, and though he didn't know what the future held, he felt a strange sense of anticipation building inside him. The morning sun had barely risen over the hills when Ayana stepped off the stagecoach in front of the local cafe. The air was crisp and cool, and the small town seemed to be just waking up. Ethan watched from a distance as the stagecoach rattled to a stop, its wheels creaking in protest. He had seen travelers come and go through this town many times, but today felt different. This time the visitor was someone he had heard about, a woman from the Apache tribe, known for her cooking skills and for bringing a quiet strength wherever she went. Ethan had been expecting someone tall, someone imposing. But what he saw was a woman whose presence was felt more than seen. Ayana stood with grace, her movements calm and deliberate as she gathered her few belongings from the coach. She was not tall by any means, but there was something about the way she carried herself that made her stand out among the crowd. Her hair, long and dark, was neatly braided down her back, and her eyes, a deep shade of brown, reflected a wisdom beyond her years. The townspeople who had gathered to watch the arrival seemed to hold their breath. They had all heard the rumors about Ayana, the woman who was part of the Apache tribe and yet had come to work in the town. Some were curious, others skeptical. There was a long history of distrust between the Apache and the settlers, and while times had changed, old prejudices still ran deep. Ayana, however, paid little attention to the whispers that floated through the air. She was used to it. She had grown up hearing the stories, understanding the divide and knowing that her place in the world was never simple. But she didn't let that stop her. She had a purpose, and she had come here with determination. As she walked into the cafe to meet the townsfolk and figure out her next step, she was greeted by a few friendly faces. The cafe was bustling with the regulars, farmers, traders, and shopkeepers, all talking over coffee and breakfast. The smell of freshly baked bread, frying bacon, and brewing coffee filled the air, making Ayana's stomach rumble slightly. She had been traveling for days and hadn't eaten a proper meal in what felt like forever. The owner of the cafe, A large man with a thick mustache named Hank smiled warmly when he saw her. "Ayana," he said, his voice booming. "It's good to see you, girl. The place wouldn't be the same without you around." Ayana returned the smile, but it was soft and reserved. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. "Thank you, Hank," she replied, her voice calm and steady. "I've come for work." "Well, you've certainly found it here," Hank said, pointing toward the kitchen. "The cooking's all yours. But there's something else you need to know. You've caught the attention of someone." Ayana raised an eyebrow in curiosity. "Who?" "The rancher." "Ethan Bradford," Hank said, leaning in closer. "He's looking for a cook, and from what I've heard, he's not the type to ask for help easily. But I think you might be exactly what he needs." Ayana nodded slowly. She had heard of Ethan Bradford, though she didn't know much about him. It was clear from Hank's tone that he thought highly of the rancher. "Where can I find him?" "He'll be at his ranch, of course," Hank said. "It's just a short ride from here. But I'll warn you, Ethan's not someone who trusts easily. He's lost a lot. He's been through things that most folks can't even imagine. So, if you're thinking of helping him, you might want to tread carefully." Ayana absorbed Hank's words, but she wasn't deterred. She knew that trust wasn't something that came easily, especially for someone like Ethan. She had grown up understanding how important it was to earn trust, to show people that they could rely on you. That was part of what had drawn her to this place in the first place. She wasn't just here to cook. She was here for something more. After a brief breakfast, Ayana made her way to the ranch. The ride was longer than she had expected, and as she rode out of the town and into the wide open plains, she couldn't help but feel a sense of calm. The land was vast and empty, and the wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying with it the scent of the earth and the promise of a new beginning. As she approached the ranch, the sight of the large house looming in the distance made her heart race. She had been told it was a beautiful ranch, but it was far more imposing in person. The house stood tall and proud, its wooden walls weathered by time but still strong. The barn and other outbuildings scattered around the property gave it an air of something that had been built to last, a place where hard work and persistence had turned a dream into reality. When Ayana arrived at the front gate, she dismounted her horse and took a deep breath. This was it, the moment that had brought her here. She wasn't sure what to expect from Ethan, but she knew one thing for certain. She had come for a reason, and she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She walked toward the house, the sound of her boots crunching against the gravel path echoing in the quiet morning air. As she reached the porch, she knocked on the door, her heart beating in her chest. She didn't know what to expect, but she was determined to make a good impression. Moments later, the door creaked open, and there he stood, the rancher, Ethan Bradford. He was tall, with broad shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of the world. His face was weathered from years of hard work, and his eyes, though weary, held a certain strength. Ethan stood there for a moment, studying her, his gaze unwavering. She could see the skepticism in his eyes, the guarded look that he had worn for so long. But there was also something else, something softer. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but there was a kind of understanding in the way he looked at her. "You're the cook," he said, his voice low and steady. Ayana nodded. "I've come to help." He hesitated, clearly unsure of what to say next. "I didn't expect you to come all the way here. I had no choice," Ayana replied simply. "I'm here because I've come to be your wife." Ethan's expression faltered. He was taken aback, but there was no mistaking the seriousness in her words. The silence stretched between them as he processed what she had just said. The townspeople had warned him that Ayana wasn't like the others, but this was something he hadn't prepared for. "Your wife?" Ethan repeated, still unsure if he had heard her right. Ayana nodded. "Yes, I've come to be your wife." Ethan stood motionless for a moment, his heart racing as he tried to understand what this woman, this stranger, was saying. His mind screamed with questions, and yet all he could do was look at her. Something about her calm demeanor, her unwavering confidence, made it impossible to dismiss her words outright. He had been expecting a cook, but this was beyond anything he had anticipated. The moment lingered, and Ayana held his gaze, waiting for him to speak. He still wasn't sure what to say, but in that moment, he realized one thing. His life, already difficult and filled with pain, was about to change forever. The days that followed Ayana's arrival at the ranch were filled with a mix of curiosity and silence. Ethan, still grappling with the shock of her unexpected declaration, found himself torn between the practical needs of his life and the unexpected bond he was beginning to feel with her. Though she had come to cook, her presence seemed to fill every corner of his home. It wasn't just her cooking that had changed things. It was her calm presence, her steady gaze, and the quiet strength she carried that began to stir something in him. Ayana took to her work with a quiet determination. Every morning she rose early, even before the first light of dawn. Ethan could hear the sound of her moving around the kitchen preparing breakfast. It was a sound that, for the first time in what seemed like forever, felt familiar. The smells that wafted through the house, freshly baked bread, eggs, bacon, reminded him of the mornings with Sarah, his late wife, when everything had felt normal, before life had changed so drastically. But there was something different about Ayana. The way she moved, the way she carried herself, was unlike anything he had experienced before. She wasn't just here to cook. She was here to create a sense of home, a sense of peace that had been missing since the day Sarah passed. Still, Ethan was hesitant. Despite everything she was offering, part of him couldn't help but keep his distance. His heart was still scarred, and he was unsure if he was ready to love again, especially not in the way Ayana seemed to be suggesting. Over time, however, he started to notice things, small things, that made him question his resistance. One morning, as he sat down to breakfast, he noticed that the food tasted different. It wasn't just the way it was prepared, it was how it made him feel. For the first time in a long while, he felt nourished in more ways than one. He looked up at Ayana, who was sitting across from him, her quiet gaze focused on him as she carefully sipped her coffee. "This is good," he said, his voice low. He hadn't intended to speak, but the words slipped out. Ayana smiled softly, a small smile that was filled with a quiet pride. "I'm glad you like it," she said, her voice steady and calm. "I've cooked many meals in my life, but this place, your ranch, it feels different. It feels like it's meant to be."
Ethan didn't respond right away.
Instead, he glanced down at his plate, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. He had never been one to express his emotions easily, and yet he couldn't help but feel a pull toward her, something deeper than just gratitude for a well-cooked meal. As the days turned into weeks, Ayana's presence began to change not just the ranch but Ethan himself. The ranch, which had once felt like an empty, barren place, was slowly coming back to life. The animals seemed healthier, the fields greener, and the atmosphere lighter. Ethan had always taken pride in his work, but he couldn't deny that something about working alongside Ayana made everything feel more manageable, more purposeful. Her quiet efficiency, her deep understanding of what needed to be done, made him realize that he wasn't alone anymore. Still, the walls he had built around himself remained. As much as he admired Ayana, he wasn't ready to let go of the pain he carried. He couldn't simply replace his late wife. His heart still mourned for the life they had shared, the future they had planned. He wasn't sure how to handle these new feelings, and every time he found himself growing closer to Ayana, he quickly pulled back, unsure if he was ready to face what it might mean to love again. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a deep shade of purple, Ethan stood by the corral, watching the cattle graze peacefully. Ayana walked up beside him, her presence as familiar to him now as the land itself. For a moment, they stood in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. "You've made this place feel alive again," Ethan said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken words. He didn't look at her as he spoke, but he could feel her presence beside him, steady and unwavering. Ayana glanced at him, her eyes soft. "This ranch, this land, it has a soul. It just needed someone to care for it, to nurture it. You've done the hard work, Ethan. You've laid the foundation. Now it's time to let it grow." Her words stirred something inside him. He had spent so many years working alone, trying to keep his grief locked away. But standing here now beside Ayana, he realized that maybe he didn't have to do everything alone. Maybe there was space in his heart, space in his life, for something more. That night, as they sat at the dinner table, the conversation shifted. The usual silence between them had lessened, replaced by a new, deeper connection. Ethan found himself sharing more than he had intended to, speaking of his past, of Sarah, and the dreams they had once shared. Ayana listened quietly, never interrupting, offering only a gentle presence as he spoke. It wasn't the kind of conversation Ethan was used to, but it felt right. For the first time, he felt like someone truly understood his pain, his loss. "Do you ever think about the future?" Ayana asked softly, her voice breaking the quiet. Ethan hesitated, unsure of how to answer. The future had always felt like a distant thing, something out of reach. But now, sitting across from Ayana, he felt a flicker of hope that maybe the future wasn't as bleak as he had once thought.
"I don't know," he replied honestly. "I used to."
But after everything that happened with Sarah, I didn't think there was much to look forward to anymore.
Ayana nodded, understanding more than words could say. "Sometimes the future isn't something we can see clearly," she said.
But that doesn't mean it's not worth looking toward. Ethan thought about her words as they finished their meal in silence. There was something about Ayana, something about the way she spoke, the way she lived, that made him want to believe in a better future. But he wasn't sure if he was ready to take that step. The walls he had built around his heart had been there for so long that the thought of letting them crumble felt both terrifying and freeing. The next morning, things changed again.
Ayana didn't just prepare the usual breakfast. She added a little something extra. The table was set with fresh fruit, a loaf of bread she had baked from scratch, and a pot of coffee brewed just right.
The meal was simple, but the warmth it radiated was unlike anything Ethan had felt in a long time. As he sat down at the table, he looked across at Ayana. She was busying herself with a task in the kitchen, but she looked up when she noticed him watching her. "You've changed everything," Ethan said quietly. "Not just a ranch, but me too. I don't know what you came here to do, but I'm beginning to think it was more than just cooking." Ayana smiled softly, and for the first time Ethan saw the faintest hint of something more in her eyes, something deeper, something that spoke of possibilities. "I came to help," she said simply, "but I think I came for more than that too." Ethan's heart thudded in his chest, and for a moment he let himself feel it. Let himself feel the warmth that had been missing for so long.
He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while he felt like he might be ready to find out.
As the weeks passed, the ranch began to change in ways that Ethan hadn't expected. It wasn't just the cattle growing healthier, or the crops beginning to flourish again. It was the way the land seemed to breathe with new life, as if it recognized the care Ayana had brought to it. Her presence was subtle, like the wind in the trees or the sunlight that warmed the earth every morning. But it was undeniable. The once silent ranch had come alive. Ethan found himself waking up earlier each day, looking forward to the meals that Ayana prepared with such care. At first, the act of sharing meals felt awkward. He wasn't used to sitting at the table with someone else, let alone having someone else cook for him. But slowly, the routine of shared meals became one of the best parts of his day. They ate together in the mornings and evenings, and though their conversations were often quiet, the companionship was enough to fill the space between them. Ayana, too, seemed to settle into a rhythm at the ranch. It worked alongside Ethan, tending to the house, helping with the animals, and, of course, cooking the meals. There were days when she would catch Ethan watching her from across the room, his gaze lingering longer than usual. There was no judgment in her eyes, only a quiet understanding. She had seen the sorrow in his eyes when they first met, the walls he had built around his heart. And now, as the days turned into weeks, she saw those walls slowly beginning to crack. But even as their bond grew stronger, Ethan still hesitated. He couldn't help but wonder if he was simply filling the emptiness left behind by his late wife. Was he moving on too quickly? Was Ayana just a way to heal the wound that Sarah's death had left, or was there something deeper between them? Something that went beyond the need for companionship. One evening, as they worked together in the barn moving hay and feeding the horses, Ayana spoke softly. "Ethan," she said, her voice breaking through the silence, You don't have to be afraid of moving on. I'm not here to replace anyone. I'm here to be who I am, and I want to help you in whatever way I can." Ethan paused, looking at her with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. The barn was quiet except for the soft sounds of the animals, but there was a tension in the air, a weight that hung between them. He wasn't sure how to respond, but her words stayed with him. He had never once considered that he might be afraid of moving on, but now that she had said it, he realized that was exactly what had been holding him back. "Why are you still here?" Ethan asked, his voice quieter than usual. He wasn't sure if he wanted an answer, but the question had been lingering in his mind for some time now. Why had Ayana come to this ranch? To him. She had made it clear from the beginning that she wasn't just there to cook, but there were still so many things he didn't understand. Ayana turned to face him, her expression gentle, but there was a spark of something else in her eyes, something strong, something real. "I'm here because I see you," she said softly. "I see the man you are beneath all the pain and the walls, and I see that you're ready to move forward even if you don't know it yet." Her words struck him harder than he expected. He had never truly let anyone see him, not in the way Ayana was seeing him now, but in that moment something shifted. The way she looked at him wasn't with pity or with hesitation, it was with understanding, and even more than that, with hope. A hope that he had buried deep inside himself, convinced it wasn't worth believing in anymore. But here it was, staring him in the face. As they continued to work side by side in the barn, something unspoken passed between them, a connection that had been growing steadily since her arrival. Ethan didn't know what it was exactly, but it felt real, something he couldn't ignore anymore. The more time he spent with Ayana, the more he realized that he wasn't afraid of her being there. He was afraid of what it might mean to open his heart again. In the days that followed, Ethan began to notice the little things, how Ayana would hum softly as she worked, how she always made sure there was a warm meal waiting for him at the end of the day. Her smile, though quiet, had a way of lighting up even the darkest corners of the ranch. And though he couldn't always put his feelings into words, Ethan realized that he had started to depend on her in ways he hadn't expected. It wasn't just her cooking or her work around the ranch, it was her presence, her unwavering support, and the quiet strength she brought to everything she did. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Ethan turned to her with a question that had been weighing on him.
"Ayana, do you ever miss home?" Ayana didn't answer immediately. She stared out at the horizon, her eyes distant for a moment.
"I do," she said softly. "I miss the mountains, the land, the people. But I've come to realize that home is not just a place. It's where you find peace, where you find belonging." "And I think I found a little piece of that here." Ethan didn't respond right away. Her words hung in the air, mixing with the cool evening breeze. There was something about what she said that resonated with him. He had spent so many years thinking that he couldn't find peace again, that he couldn't belong after losing Sarah. But Ayana's presence, her words, had begun to change that. Maybe home wasn't just about the land or the house. Maybe it was about the people you shared it with. Over the next few days, Ethan found himself thinking about Ayana more and more. He couldn't stop the thoughts from coming. He realized that what he had been afraid of wasn't just moving on. It was the fear of loving someone again, the fear of opening his heart to another person and risking the same kind of loss that had almost destroyed him. But as time passed, he began to see that love wasn't something you could control. It wasn't something you could simply shut away forever. Love, like the land they worked on, had to be tended to, nurtured, and cared for. One afternoon, as they worked together in the fields, Ethan finally found the courage to speak his truth. "Ayana," he said, his voice low but firm, "I don't know what this is, what we're building, but I know that I've never felt this way before.
And I'm willing to see where it goes."
Ayana stopped what she was doing and turned to face him, her expression soft but filled with understanding. "You don't have to know everything all at once, Ethan," she said quietly. "You just have to be willing to take the next step." In that moment, Ethan realized that he was ready to take that step. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. The days seemed to stretch on like a gentle, unhurried breeze as the summer turned into fall and the ranch settled into a new rhythm. The transformation of the ranch was evident to anyone who saw it. The fields once neglected were now thriving with crops, and the cattle roamed freely across the pastures, their coats shining under the sun. The barn stood tall and proud, a symbol of the work that had gone into restoring not just the land but the heart of the ranch itself. For Ethan, it was a quiet joy he had never known before. The work was still hard, the days still long, but there was a purpose in each task now. There was no longer the weight of loneliness that had hung over him for so long. Ayana had brought not just a change in the ranch, but a change in him. He no longer felt the constant ache of loss that had once consumed him. Instead, he found a deep sense of peace in the work they shared, in the quiet moments of companionship, and in the knowledge that he was not facing the future alone. Ayana, too, seemed more at ease. She had become an integral part of the ranch, not just as a cook, but as a partner in every sense of the word. There were still moments when she missed her homeland, her people, and the life she had left behind. But as the days passed, she began to see that home wasn't just about where you came from. It was about where you found love, where you found a place to belong. And here, on this ranch, with Ethan, she had found that place. The quiet bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. It wasn't loud or forceful, but it was steady, like the land itself. They had settled into a comfortable routine, each finding joy in the little things. The shared laughter over a meal, the quiet walks after dinner as they watched the sun set over the hills, and the simple, unspoken understanding they had with each other. Still, there was a part of Ethan that held back, unsure of whether he was truly ready for the kind of future Ayana seemed to be suggesting. He had lost so much, and the thought of opening his heart again terrified him. He didn't know how to love without fear, without the worry that it might be taken away just as quickly as it had been given. One evening after a long day of work, they sat on the porch, watching the stars appear in the sky, one by one. The air was cool, and the sound of crickets filled the night. Ethan sat in his usual chair, Ayana beside him. The conversation between them had become easy, a comfortable flow of words and silences. But tonight, there was something different. Tonight Ethan felt a quiet sense of determination rise within him. Ayana had noticed the change in him, too. Over the past few weeks, she had seen him wrestle with his own fears and uncertainties. She could tell he was still holding back, still unsure of what it would mean to let go of the past and embrace the future. "Ayana," Ethan said, his voice soft but steady, "I've been thinking a lot about the things you've said, about moving forward. And I don't want to be afraid anymore. I've been holding on to things that are long gone. I've been afraid of what it might mean to let someone in again." Ayana turned to him, her gaze steady and kind. She had known this moment would come, the moment when Ethan would face the truth, that he couldn't keep hiding from the future, from the love that was right in front of him. "You don't have to be afraid, Ethan," she said gently. "I'm not asking you to forget the past. We both have our histories, our memories. But we can create something new together. We don't have to carry our pain forever. We can let it guide us, but we don't have to let it control us." Ethan's heart thudded in his chest as he listened to her words. He had never been the kind of man who could easily express his emotions, but in this moment, with Ayana beside him, he realized he didn't need to say anything grand or profound. He didn't need to have all the answers. All he needed to do was listen and to trust. "I'm ready," he said simply, his voice filled with a quiet conviction. "I'm ready to take that step with you." Ayana smiled, a soft and sincere smile that reached her eyes. "I've been waiting for you to say that," she said, her voice full of warmth. The next few weeks brought a shift in their relationship. It wasn't a dramatic change, but it was felt in every moment they shared. They worked together more closely than ever, and Ethan found himself leaning on Ayana in ways he hadn't before. Whether it was asking for her help with the cattle or simply sharing his thoughts with her as they walked through the fields, he began to realize just how much she had come to mean to him. One afternoon, as they worked in the barn, Ethan looked at Ayana with a question in his eyes. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low, "about what you said the other night, about starting a new life together. And I think I'm ready for that. I want that, but I don't want to rush anything. I want it to be right." Ayana nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and hope. "We'll take it one day at a time, Ethan. There's no need to rush. What we have is real, and that's enough." And so together they began to build the life they had always dreamed of, one filled with the quiet moments of shared laughter, the joy of working side by side, and the comfort of knowing that they had found something worth holding on to. As the months passed, word began to spread through the town that things were changing at the Bradford Ranch. The once quiet land had become a place of growth, of new beginnings. And as the seasons shifted from fall to winter, Ethan realized that he had found a kind of peace he had never known. The ranch, which had once felt like a prison of loneliness, now felt like home. One evening, as the first snow of the season began to fall, Ethan took Ayana's hand in his, the warmth of their touch contrasting against the cold air. They stood together on the porch, watching the snow blanket the world in white. "I don't know what the future holds," Ethan said, his voice filled with a quiet certainty. "But I know that I want to face it with you." Ayana smiled, her heart full. "I feel the same way." And in that moment, under the falling snow, with the ranch behind them and the future ahead, they both knew that they had found something rare and beautiful.
A love that had come from the most unexpected of places, but one that would last through whatever challenges life would bring.
They were no longer just two people, living in separate worlds. They were partners, building a future together hand in hand.